All right, recording.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out to the Thanksgiving Eve edition of coloradoSprings.js. This is a monthly meetup. We do this every month, practically rain or shine. We may take December off, so I'm saying both things at the same time. But we really appreciate you all coming. This is a great venue in Colorado Springs to meet technologists and engineers of all stripes who are just interested in the kinds of things that you're interested in. So you can make friends, contact, network right here every month at Colorado Springs JS. Quick shout out, my company Bomb Bomb sponsors our meetup subscription and snacks and beer. I swear when we come back in person, we'll be snacking again someday. So thanks to Bomb Bomb for throwing some money. We're also hiring an engineer or two and a bunch of other positions. So if you go to bombbomb.com, you might find a fun career waiting for you. So that's our shtick. Usually Epicentral hosts this, and they're really great friends of ours as well, and we'll get back there soon too. So tonight's presentation, Matt is going to be presenting on Ember.js. Matt, you're what, 9 months out of a boot camp?
More like 6 or 9 weeks. It was October when I graduated.
This is the hottest information you can get, people. This is hot off the presses. So without any further ado, I hand it over to Matt for a conversation on Ember.js.
That's right. All right. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for coming to hang out, especially on the night before Thanksgiving. Thank you for the muted claps. I appreciate it. This is going to be a 2020 crash course on JS, Ember.js. I've spent about a week or two in Ember, and so we're going to see what can you learn in that short period of a time. How does it compare to React? And we're going to ask the question, should you be building more Ember apps? So before we get into some code, let's take a look just on what's on the menu, where are we going tonight. We're going to start out with a little bit of history. Where did Ember come from? And then we're going to put it into context of where it's at today. Then we'll zoom in a little bit and see what does it take to get started in Ember. And we're going to take a look at 4 different snapshots. We're going to look at templates, routing, testing, and components. And then we're going to ask that question at the end, should you be building more Ember apps? Now, I want you all to pull up your phone or open up a new tab and go to ahaslides.com/Ember2020. I want this to be interactive and a conversation more than just me jabbering at you for 30, 40 minutes about a framework that you don't know much about. So as you're going there, take note that this is Ember Tomster, and he is the official mascot of Ember along with his sister Zoe. He's going to be here to help facilitate the quiz questions, so be on your best behavior. And while you're all navigating to that link, just a bit of background on myself. When I first started my professional career, I started out in the nonprofit world. That's where I, at the time, envisioned myself being long-term. So I had 2 different stints in the nonprofit sector. The first place, I was primarily mobilizing volunteers and organizing and executing and speaking at large gatherings and events. The second stop for me, I ran a mentoring program for urban youth. And then the third stop for me, I moved into the small business world, and I wore many hats at that place. It was a small landscape construction company in Indianapolis. And so I was the HR guy, a project manager, a division manager, the accounts receivable and payable guy, and heavy equipment operator in a pinch. So lots of different hats there, including a construction hard hat. And when my family and I moved to Colorado this January, I decided this was the right window to transition into software engineering. So as Patrick mentioned at the top of the hour, I went through Flatiron School this summer. I graduated in October, and I sat down and said to myself, I have been looking at Ruby on Rails and React, a lot of vanilla JavaScript. I've got a job search on my plate now, networking to do. So what should I spend my time with? Let's go with a relatively obscure front-end framework, Ember.js. And so that's how I've spent some of my time in the last week or so. And so I want to know, what is your exposure to Ember? Let me just get a little bit of a baseline for you guys before we get into the presentation. So you should be able to see the Ember.js 2020 crash course AHA slide here. And when I toggle over, you should all have the opportunity to vote. Let me know if you don't, but we should see some votes coming in here. Oh, I gotta open up submissions. There we go. 30 seconds on the clock. All right. Have you never heard of Ember before? You've heard of it, but haven't used it. You've worked with or around Ember a bit. You've used it a lot and know it well. Or I am Yehuda Katz. I'm taking over the presentation now. And I'm not seeing anybody claim that. So unfortunately, it looks like Yehuda is not here with us tonight. And this was a real low bar just to get our feet wet with AHA. Obviously, no wrong answers there. And that's helpful. So it looks like almost everyone has heard of Ember, but haven't used it. And some folks have never even heard of it before tonight. So that's great. That's pretty much where I was a few weeks ago. So let's do another one here. Which framework is the oldest? This one is going to actually put a little bit of your knowledge to the test. Which framework is the oldest? Don't cheat. You got 25 seconds left. We've got some votes for jQuery, Ember, React, Vue, and Angular are all other options. Angular with that 11%. Everybody got their chips into jQuery. Let's see if anybody else wants to go with React, Vue, or Ember. And pencils are down. And the correct answer is Angular. Now, before you get mad at me, it's important to know that if you voted jQuery, you lost on a technicality, just as you would have if you voted React. Both jQuery and React self-identify as libraries, not as frameworks. So that gives Angular the crown for oldest framework. Angular, the first iteration showed up in 2010, and Ember was the next in this crew to show up in late 2011. jQuery 2006 or so would have been the leader if I didn't flunk you all on a technicality. All right, so let's look at a little bit of history of Ember. Like I said, founded in 2011. Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale are these two guys right here. They were the original founders, and it's important to know that they came out of the Ruby on Rails community. And so they brought a lot of the philosophy and a lot of the ethos of Rails into Ember. So they set out to build a framework for ambitious developers, and it's been around for almost a decade now through 3 major versions. The most recent version came out in the spring of 2020, and they called it Ember Octane. So Ember Octane is going to be what we're working with this evening, and a few points on Ember Octane. They really shifted into what they call the HTML first approach. So a lot of what you're going to see tonight is just HTML. And then they also followed some of the other trends in the industry, really focusing in on the component-based structure. That was already there, but they really leaned into that component-based structure even more with the Ember Octane release. So where is Ember today? Well, React is king, as we probably all here know. Angular is slightly behind React in terms of total usage as far as recent surveys go. And then Vue is a little further behind in third. And then we have Ember here in a distant fourth. And that's as far as total usage. That being said, you see some flashy logos here. We've got Netflix, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Twitch, Heroku, Square. This is just a sampling of the companies that are using Ember. So total usage across the industry for Ember, distant fourth. But there are some big players that are using Ember, and they bring a lot of viability to the Ember framework and the Ember community. So something that you will hear from people in the Ember community if you talk to them is this kind of bigger is not better mentality. Yeah, I'm sure they would like to steal a little bit of market share from React, and they are continuing to grow. But the emphasis within the Ember community is on the people who are using Ember now. And we'll touch on that in a moment, just on the focus of the community and the community-oriented approach. Ember is, from what I can gather, really invested in the people who are using it now, as opposed to really trying to rapidly grow and expand. So a few points on the community-oriented approach. One is EmberConf. So conferences are conferences, but EmberConf is something that the people that I've talked to in the last week or so who have gone, it's got a different feel to it. It feels more like a family reunion, as opposed to a conference where you're going to go and you're probably going to tune out and you're going to get some swag and you're going to move on. This is a place where it seems like people are really going and enjoying their time and seeing their friends and connecting with the other people who are using the tools that they're using. Beyond that, there's something called a RFC, a request for comment, which is highly utilized within the Ember community. The idea is that anybody can contribute to Ember, and it's not that hard of, not that high of a jump to be contributing to Ember. You can submit a request for comment if you think, hey, this is a feature that I would love to see in Ember, this tool that I'm using every day, or this is something that it feels like a bug, it feels like something's not quite working right, I think we should smooth this over. And there's a whole process for RFCs where you do your research, you do your groundwork, you submit an RFC, and then it's reviewed and it's discussed by the community. And if the Ember community at large says, hey, you know what, I think this feature would be good to include, it doesn't just go away and the Ember gods work on it for 2 weeks and push it out in the next release. The person or people who have submitted that RFC and done the legwork and built out the vision for it are frequently invited in and said, hey, you brought this to our attention, why don't you help build it? Why don't you help work on it? So that there's this really emphasis and focus on keeping everyone involved in the community. All right, so one more aha before we dive into some code here. What is most important to you in a framework? What do you like to see, or what do you prefer when you choose a front-end framework to use? Do you care most about the strong community? Do you care about it being fast? Do you care about boilerplate code being taken care of? Or do you have a preference towards an opinionated framework? All right, we've got much broader answers here. 3 seconds left. And of course, this is no wrong answer, but the trick is that all 4 of these are features of Ember. Ember has a strong community, like I talked about, and Ember takes care of a lot of boilerplate code. We're going to see that in just a moment. Ember is heavy, but it's fast. And Ember is an opinionated framework. It's not React. Everything does not go. There are right and wrong ways to do things. So again, right before we get into some nitty-gritty overview, pros and cons, general perceptions of Ember. You get a lot for free, kind of like Rails. What they consider this, they call it the batteries included approach. The community is strong. The docs are really strong and helpful. I've spent a lot of time in the docs over the last couple of days. Really clear, well-written, and the CLI is really powerful. Testing is also prioritized in Ember. It's really easy to generate a test. It's really easy to incorporate them throughout your app. So general cons, the learning curve can be steep. If you've spent time in other front-end frameworks, you can probably pick it up, you know, without too much trouble, but compared to a React or a Vue, there are some things where you have to figure out like, okay, where's the furniture in here? Why are we doing it this way? Once you get going, then it makes more sense. And like I mentioned, it is heavy. Some developers really don't like that. It is fast. It's a very fast framework, but it is heavy. And so some folks have opted not to use it for smaller or mid-sized projects. But you know, there seems to be less objection to that size once you get into a larger scale applications. And then thirdly, it's just not as well known. And so being not as well known, it's something that not a lot of developers are reaching for when they're thinking about which tool should I use for my next project. All right, so let's take a look at how to get started. Ember CLI, like I mentioned, is very powerful. So npm install global Ember CLI, then step back, take a drink. It's going to take a minute to download. It's big, but then once it gets here, it's really nice and helpful. So we're going to run Ember new and Colorado 14ers. That's going to be the name of the app that we're going to put together this evening. So first thing you'll notice is this is what you get on the left here with Ember, and this is what you get on the right with Rails. So if you haven't used Rails before, this is a little visual to see there are a lot of similarities in the file structure, and not only is there a robust structure here, but within each of these folders, there are lots of files, and in each file, there's a lot of boilerplate code. The idea is batteries are included. If there's stuff that you're going to write every time you spin up an Ember app, we're going to take care of that right up front. We don't want you to waste any time writing the same stuff over and over again. So to start up a server, you just call Ember serve or Ember S, and localhost 4200 is the channel that Ember prefers. First thing you'll notice here, if you've worked with React, like I've been coming out of some React time, is this is a really helpful little page. We've got links to a quick start. We've got links to some guides. We've got 3 different links, different on-roads into the community, and then a nice little 2-liner here of how to get rid of this page. Not a useless React spinning logo that does nobody any good, and then you have to go and you have to delete, 40 different files, yada, yada, yada. It's really clear and clean and simple and helpful, which is quite nice. All right, so let's look at templates here. Templates are the way that Ember thinks about pages. So when you think template, think page. Inside of our app folder here, we already have a templates folder, and we have an application.hbs file. HBS is handlebars. And so without getting too into the weeds, too nitty gritty, in handlebars files, you're going to write HTML. And so this was here for us already. We didn't have to set anything up. This welcome page component is what we saw back here with the congratulations, you made it. And tonight what we're going to do is we're actually going to delete this handlebars file, this application.hbs. We will resurrect it later on, but right now we're going to get rid of it, and we're going to replace it with an index.hbs. So right here, I've written up a couple divs. We've got a class of Jumbo, class of Right and Mountain, and then we've got an H2 and a paragraph. So we're going to save that. It automatically refreshes, and we've got this beautiful index.hbs. So to preserve all of your sanity and mine as well, I did go ahead and take the liberty of applying some CSS. So we're going to look at something like this throughout the evening, which would be a little bit easier on the eyes. And next up, we're going to generate another template, another page. This is going to be the about.hbs. This one is very similar to the index, and it's going to look like this. We've got our about page. And third, we're going to generate a contact.hbs. And in here, we've got a little bit more. We've got an address. We've got a phone number. We've got my new email address at this Colorado 14ers organization. So here we go. This is what we're going to work with. Templates are pages, pretty straightforward. All right, let's go to an aha. In a nutshell, I want you all to tell me, what are templates? 30 seconds. Templates are components, pages, routes, and models. Which one? 10 seconds left. Looks like pages is in the lead. Components coming up to pages. Down to the wire. Do we have any final votes? No tiebreaker. Pages is the correct answer. Templates within Ember are, generally speaking, in a nutshell, pages. We haven't quite got to components yet. All right, so let's look at routing. Now, in the last week or so, I've been hanging out with Ember. The router system is something that's really stood out to me. It's native. You don't need to bring in a third-party router. You need to go and choose which router do I want and figure out, what are the instructions and how do I use it. There is no wrong way to do it. There is one right way to set up a router, and it's clear, it's concise, and it's powerful. So this link to tag right here is what you're going to see wherever you want to link to something. It makes sense. And then this route is going to be the URL. This one in particular is an about. And this class of button is basically just saying, I'm going to put this one on a button. It's going to have the about us text. Now, before we get to those link to tags, this is the router.js file. Again, this was provided. I didn't have to generate this file on my own, and I didn't have to write any of this code. This was all sitting here just waiting for me. This is very helpful. So what we're going to do, we're going to put 2 lines of code in, line 10 and 11 here, and we're going to write this.route, and that the first one is going to take us to the about page, and the next one, this.route contact, is going to take us to the contact page. Now this is just a little wrinkle here. This is a custom URL. So if you're working with some legacy code and somebody else already preferred the URL getting in touch, no problem. You can route to the contact page, but use the URL getting in touch. All right, so let's actually put the link tos in the templates. Again, we've got 3 templates: index, contact, and about. All we have to do is put link to the route that you want to link it to, and then you can style it however you want. And now we've got this nice About Us button right here, and just imagine me clicking on it, and it takes us to the About page. Simple as that. Same deal with the About. We go into the About template, and we're going to route to the contact page. Now we've got a nice button that'll take us to the contact page. Same thing on the contact. We're going to route back to the About page. Here we go. And that's it. Routes are super clear, super easy to use. All you have to do is include the link to. And let's see. Are routes set up in app.js? Are they set up in each individual template? Are they set up in individual components? Or are they set up in router.js? Where do we set up routes in Ember? App.js, individual templates, components, or router.js? 2, 1. All right, the answer is router.js. We're setting up the routes in router.js, and then we're just going to drop a link to wherever we want to link to. So in the case we looked at, they were in templates. All right, now let's take a look at testing. Testing in Ember is a first-class citizen. It's not an afterthought. So to be honest, the time that I've spent in React so far, I have not implemented a lot of testing in my apps. It's kind of felt like this thing that is important. It should include it, but my apps have been small so far, and I just haven't really waded into it. Well, Ember makes testing really easy, and they make it a part of the family. It's not something that's an afterthought you're going to go out and throw in later, and boy, I hope it works. So there are 3 primary types of tests that Ember provides: application tests, which are also known as acceptance tests; rendering tests, which are also known as integration tests; and unit tests. So we're going to take a look at what it takes to set up an application test. All we have to do is run Ember generate acceptance test, which is the type of test we're going to run, and then Colorado 14ers is the name of the file that we want to generate. So we already had this test folder, and now we have an acceptance folder with the file that we just generated. And with that one line in the command line, we've got this whole boilerplate set up for us, which is really nice. Now we need to actually tell it what we want it to test for. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell this imaginary robot. This robot is going to run through our app. It's going to click around and see if everything works. That's what an application test is like. We're going to tell this little robot, async await, you're a fast robot, so just make sure everything loads. Hold on a moment. And now we want you to go to the index route and then check that URL path. Make sure that we're in the right spot. And then also double check that page, that template should have an H2 that says, welcome to the Colorado 14ers. That's just a double check. And if both of those things pass, then yeah, okay, we're in the right place. All right, now I want you to run down and see, is there a button that says About Us? And if you click on it, do you get routed to the About page? So let's find out. Robot set free, and yes, the tests have passed. So that means that, great, our code is working, everything is correct. All it took to run that test was ember test -- server or ember t-s. So let's see if we can break it. Let's make sure this test is actually working. So all I did was went into the template, the index template, and commented out the about route button, which the test is looking for that. The robot's going to run through there and it's going to be looking for that button so it can click on it. So let's see what happens when we run that test again. Whew, lots of red. So all it took was commenting out one line, the test is broken, and we get lots of red. So this is great. It was really easy to set up. And if anybody's going to come down the line and they're going to tweak something, they're going to change some names, anything that is going to set off a situation where a user could click on a button and they don't get to the right spot, test is going to catch it. So let's go back to AHA. Which type of test mimics a user running around, clicking and seeing if everything is working? Is that an application test? Is that an acceptance test? Is that a rendering test? Or is that a unit test? Application and acceptance. All right, we've got a unit in here. Anyone want to jump on rendering? Anyone for rendering? A lot of head shakes. No one likes the rendering test. All right, pencils down, and application and acceptance test are both correct. It's technically an application test, but like I said at the top, acceptance test is basically the same thing. You can call it either one. All right, so let's look at one more snapshot. Let's look at components and how they're structured in Ember. So above the line here, this is the code that we have in each of our templates. We've got a couple of divs, and then we've got page-specific content inside. Now, this is kind of small, but if you had more text here, you could see how this would be pretty wasteful to be typing this in every single template. So Ember has something called a yield. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this text this HTML that we're using everywhere in multiple templates and could be using multiple places in the future. And all we're going to do is we're going to pull that out and we're going to put it in a component file. This is also going to be a handlebars file. We're going to drop that in here and we're going to put this yield in. And the yield is going to be kind of like a portal. So the way it looks here, we're going to have content being passed into components with the yield tag. So instead of above the line, the HTML that we had multiple divs, and then we had our custom content inside. Now we can just call the jumbo component, and then where that yield portal was inside, now we can put the specific information that we want to show up on this iteration of the component. Very easy, very straightforward. So now we'll go through and refactor all of our templates to include the jumbo, run our tests, and it passes. We've got our jumbo component and our custom component HTML inside each template. So that was pretty simple. That was basically just a refactor. But let's do something a little bit new. Let's put a nav bar in. Nav bar is what you're pretty much going to need anywhere you go. So we've got a nav bar handlebars component. And inside of the nav bar, we've got a little bit of styling and we've got a couple of links. Now, to add the nav bar, what we can do is we can go into each template and we can put that above the jumbo right at the top. And this is going to render that nav bar to each page. Simple enough. But wait, there's more, because we're trying to be simple. We're trying to be clean and not be repeating ourselves. So why would you want to put the navbar component on each template? Instead, we're going to resurrect that application.handlebars file that I mentioned at the beginning, and we're going to use something called an outlet. Again, this is one of those Ember portals. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring back that application.hbs file, and we're going to add a little bit of structure. We're going to put our navbar at the top here, and then we're going to include this outlet portal. And what's going to happen here is whichever page the user's on, that template is going to be rendered in the outlet. So let's see what we have here. All right, we have a navbar being generated by the application, and we happen to be at the index template right now. So everything in the index is being rendered where that outlet was. If we were to click on About, the navbar is going to stay, and the outlet is going to render the About template. All right, that was a fly-through look at components. So the question is, content is passed down to a component with what? Is content passed down to a component with an outlet, a prop, a yield, or a magic spell? Okay, we've got yield and outlet. I appreciate the votes for magic spell. Now let's see if anyone will take a bite of prop. Looks like yield is in the lead. No one's gonna take a bite of prop. And yes, it's the yield. The yield is the portal that's content is being passed down through two components. Okay, so let's take a step back, take a breath. We've taken a close look at 4 different elements of Ember.js. Let's look at where we came from. We started in 2011 and we looked at the history of Ember. We looked at the Ember in today's context. It's a distant fourth, but we've got plenty of big names that are using it, keeping it viable. Then we took a look at what does it take to get started? How do we get off the ground? And we took a look at templates, routing, testing, and components. Now, we haven't quite yet asked the should you be building more Ember apps question yet. And before we do, let's look at these pros and cons with some fresh eyes now that you've actually seen the insides of a quick little Ember app. You get a lot for free, batteries are included. I didn't write a lot of code. A lot of that was boilerplate, a lot of that was generated. I had to write some CSS, I had to write some HTML, but I didn't have to write that much. One of the cons was the learning curve is steep, and it did take a moment for me to figure out which way things are going and where things are supposed to go. But once you get the hang of it, Ember devs seem to say you can get up and running really quick because of those batteries that are included. The community is strong, the docs are really helpful, I can personally attest to that. The CLI is powerful, and testing is prioritized. I haven't done a lot with testing, and it was really easy to spin up some tests right off the bat. So on the con side, mentioned the learning curve being steep. It is heavy, fast but heavy, and not as well known. So the question is, after what you've seen tonight, should you be building more Ember apps? And I would say yes, maybe. It depends, obviously, on what situation you're in, what type of project you're looking to build, whether it's for personal or if it's for professional. But I hope that what you've seen tonight gives you reason enough to go and kick the tires for yourself. This link right here is to a quick start where you can go in 30, 45 minutes. You can spin up an Ember app and see what does it feel like for yourself. I can say for myself that after a week or so of using it, I don't know if it's going to be my go-to framework, but it's definitely something that I have in my tool belt, and I have it as an option that I would be interested in using in the future if the circumstances were correct. All right, so before I pass the mic back to Patrick, I want to open the floor up. Like I said, I want this to be interactive, and I'm hoping that everyone here took away something. So jump off of mute and hit me with questions, comments, concerns, gripes, anything you got. What are you thinking so far?
I had a simple one. Does it come with a like a UI framework baked in, like a Bootstrap or something?
No, it's not, but it was not difficult to whip up some CSS and make it look good.
Cool.
Does Ember work better with Rails? Like, is there extra power if you're using Ember on top of Rails versus Ember on top of whatever else?
Sure, yeah, that's a good question. My understanding is no, but if you have a background in Rails, it's going to make it easier to jump into Ember. The structure is going to be similar, so it's going to make it easier to maybe write your Ember app, but I don't believe it's going to make it any more powerful being paired up with a Rails backend.
I have a question. With React, you can kind of, say you have a really big project, you can like use a little React here and then kind of expand it over time. Does Ember, can you pair it with an app that's something else, or does it have to be like kind of the all-inclusive framework?
Yeah, you definitely can. I know companies and I know a few developers who are working on projects like that where it's a portion of what they're working with. As I mentioned, some people find it to be heavy and some people find it to be a little bit big to be using as a piece of your product until you get to a certain size. But once you get to a certain size where it makes sense to bring in an Ember, you definitely can use it alongside other frameworks.
I have a question on what exactly you mean when you say that it's heavyweight. Because I saw the testing page and that looked like pretty intense, and I imagine there's a lot there, but hopefully you're not like deploying that to production. So when you say it's heavyweight, is that like more on the developer side, or is the client runtime like enormous as well?
The answer is, from my understanding, yes. The sense that I'm getting is that in production it's fast, but the overall development file size is big, and you're getting a lot right off the bat. So with React, for example, you can start smaller as far as file size and weight goes, and you can do whatever you want with it. Ember is making assumptions that you're going to build an app that's big enough to need tests. It's going to need X, Y, and Z structure, and they're making those assumptions for you ahead of time. So depending on your project, that's either a pro or a con. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. If I could ask a follow-up, then does it have its own request library built in too?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. I would have to look that up. I'm not sure.
Well, thanks.
Yep.
Do you know of any like open source projects or anything that's using Ember that I could look at as like kind of a sample project?
That is a good question. As far as open source, I'm not sure, but what I will do is I'll put in the chat here a link to the list of companies that are using Ember. It's a pretty big list, and there's a lot of recognizable names on there. And I would imagine that if you look at some of the smaller companies, you may find some nonprofits in there. There may be some open source to check out. I'll drop that here in the chat in just a moment.
Matt, we didn't see much tonight on like data handling or models and how you're mixing those in with your handlebars components and such. Do they offer a strongly opinionated way to do that, or are you sort of on your own to mix your data into their templates?
Yep, they absolutely have a strong opinion on that. They have models and routes and the docs walk you through. It's like, this is the right way to do it, which was helpful for me. And I didn't include all that in tonight, but it was helpful for me to see, like, as a relatively new developer, this is the way to do it. So yes, they do have all of that functionality, and they do have strong opinions on the right way to do it.
Does it have some sort of like natural REST adapter where it can connect to some REST thing and sort of populate models on its own, or are you tying that to whatever you're getting back from the server?
I'm not exactly sure. That sounds like correct. Like you're barking up the right tree based on what I've seen.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I haven't spent enough time with it to be able to speak more intelligently to it. Oh, wow. You guys have been lighting up the chat here. There's that list of Ember users. What else? Any other thoughts? Is anyone swayed towards considering using Ember, or is it still like, probably not?
It'd be fun to experiment. Do you perchance know any like YouTubers or whatever that do tutorials and videos with Ember, or like streamers?
There lies one of the challenges of it being less popular. There is one YouTube series in particular, which I can link here, that I found that is current. I found that the community is active on Discord and a few other places, but there are way fewer tutorials than like if you're looking to build something in React, for example. There are tutorials out there, but a lot of them are older, and throughout their 3 different versions, a lot has changed, especially with their Ember Octane version. So if you're looking at like a lot of them in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, that's when a lot of resources that I was seeing were being generated, and those are out of date. They are not, keeping the Octane changes in mind. So I'll find this YouTube thing here, and I'll drop that in the chat. But this one that I'll drop in here is the best one that I found.
Are you in a position to summarize any of these changes going into the Octane version? Like, is it big philosophical stuff? Is it a bunch of cleanup, systemization? Like, any idea behind the major version release there?
Yeah, general cleanup, and the 2 things I touched on at the beginning were the way they languaged it was that HTML first approach and the component structure. The components have been around, but they moved some pieces around to make it really component focused. One thing I didn't touch on tonight was something interesting with the way you structure your components in Ember. You write your JavaScript in a separate file from your HTML, your handlebars. So when you have a component, let's say the about component that we wrote, we did a handlebars file, but we didn't put any JavaScript in there. If we wanted something that was going to include JavaScript on that component, we would have a separate file with the same name, but it would be a JS file. So we would have about.hbs and about.js, and you'd write all your JS in the JS file. And some of the way that they've restructured their components, to me, it seems like was a lot of the emphasis in that Octane version. They also initiated some things like tracked, which I'm not sure I can give a good description of it at the moment. It's a feature that they've been testing out, and I was getting warning messages that they may not be supporting it going forward. So they launched it in the spring of this year. They tried it out for a while. They're like, not so sure. So they've included a handful of different wrinkles that it seems like they're still reevaluating and seeing if they're going to keep in there or not.
Cool, thanks. I like that. I mean, matter of personal taste, I don't at all mind the JavaScript living in a separate file from the HTML React.
Yeah, that's something I've talked to a couple people out about over the last day or so, and I've gotten some strong opinions on that. Some people are like, no, I want everything in the same spot, centrally located. And some others are like, okay, I've got HTML or handlebars or JSX mixed in with JavaScript, mixed in with styling, and it's just like a soup. And so some people have liked this separation of concerns. So it's an interesting approach that they've taken there.
That's one of the things that I've always hated about Vue. I love Vue as a front end framework. I think it, in my opinion, it's the best one out there. Sorry, Ember, but I love Vue. I think it's fantastic. The only downside is that almost all of the examples that you find like to use Vue's single file components, which is CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, all in the same file, and that just makes me cringe.
Yep, for sure.
So I'm doing a little clicking around the manual here around Ember data and how it stores data. And at first it had me thinking, is there like a server-side component to this? But it reads pretty much like this is solidly a client-side thing.
Yep.
And you're just doing this model persistence in memory on the client. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
So did you do any like data persistence to a SQL database or anything? How does that work, I guess?
Nope. Yeah, no, it's all client side. So you would need to connect to Rails or Node or whatever. Yep. Yep. And set up your database per usual. All right. Any other thoughts before I pass this back to Patrick? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you all for hanging out this evening, especially on the eve of Thanksgiving. If we haven't met before and you want to get in contact with me, matt-long.dev is where I'm at online, and all of my relevant contact info is there. That's the best way to find me. I appreciate you coming, and if this is your first time here at the coloradoSprings.js meetup, I encourage you to come back. We have lots of fun, and we get to explore fun things like Ember.js. So thank you all for hanging out tonight.
Round of digital applause for Matt. That was awesome. Super professional, man. That was a great interactive thing. It was really great. So thank you all for coming. Don't go yet. We can hang out for a little while longer, just kind of meet one another and ask any questions. If you got any other JavaScript kind of things going on, we'd love to hear about it, or life, philosophy, any other questions at all. We're happy to shoot the heck on that. So again, I'll say thank you for coming. This meetup is nothing without your attendance, so we really appreciate you being here. And Matt, that was awesome, man. Thanks again so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Any vexing JavaScript challenges out there? Any code giving you a hard time? Anybody?